When I moved in with my daughter to help her raise her newborn, I thought it would be a blessing, a new chapter, a fuller home, a chance to be needed again. For 3 months, I cooked every meal, paid every bill, and held my grandson through every sleepless night. Then one rainy evening, I gently mentioned the utility costs, just in case they hadn't noticed. My daughter looked up from her phone and said, "You live here for free, Mom. What more do you want?" I smiled, walked back to my room, and that night I started packing, but not just my suitcase. I was packing the truth that would unravel everything they thought they had control over. My name is Mary, and I'm 60 years old. For the past 4 decades, I wore the same pair of shoes, figuratively and sometimes literally, as a caregiver, a provider, and above all, a mother. I was a community nurse for most of my life, a job that demanded everything and gave back in quiet dignity. It wasn't glamorous, but it was noble. I stitched up wounds, held trembling hands, and walked grieving families through their worst moments. But when my husband James died of a sudden stroke 2 years ago, the silence that followed was louder than all those emergency sirens I'd grown used to. The house we built together turned hollow overnight. Grief does that. It empties rooms even when they're full of furniture. Emily, my only daughter, was the bright spot in that darkness. She called more often, sent pictures of her growing belly, and eventually said, "Mom, why don't you come live with us? It'll be easier for all of us." At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to be a burden, and I wasn't ready to let go of the home where every corner whispered memories. But then she added, "We'll be a real family again. You'll help with the baby, and we'll be there for you too." The idea of being useful again. It wrapped around me like a warm blanket. So I sold the house. I poured most of the money into a down payment to help Emily and her husband Josh buy a bigger home. She said it was a temporary gift, a shared investment. Nothing formal, just family helping family. I didn't ask for contracts. That's not how I raised her, and I trusted her completely. The move was bittersweet. I packed boxes with trembling hands, folding decades of life into tape and cardboard. The first night in their home, I slept on a daybed in what they called the bonus room. No closets, but a small window with a view of the neighbor's fence. It didn't matter. I had a grandson on the way, and my daughter needed me. That was enough. Josh was cordial, polite in the way Midwestern men often are. Smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. He worked from home in tech and kept mostly to himself. Emily, on the other hand, was glowing. Motherhood had given her a softness I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. We spent mornings sorting baby clothes and evenings researching the best bottle sterilizers. I cooked dinner every night, cleaned every dish, scrubbed every surface. It wasn't asked of me, but it wasn't discouraged either. 3 weeks after the baby was born, Emily returned to work. The law firm needed her back, and I stepped in as the full-time caregiver. Diaper changes, feedings, sleepless nights. I took it all on without question. I was happy to do it. I didn't count hours, didn't clock out. After all, what's retirement for, if not to be needed? Sometimes I wondered if I was doing too much. Emily stopped asking how I was sleeping. Josh never thanked me for the meals I made or the laundry I folded. But they seemed busy. Overwhelmed. I excused the small things, told myself I was imagining the distance. Still, I noticed patterns. They never offered to share grocery bills, even though I was the one filling the fridge. I started paying the utility bills when I saw the envelopes pile up unopened. I assumed it was temporary, just a rough patch, or maybe they forgot. I didn't want to nag, so I quietly picked up the slack. Every day I reminded myself, this is family, this is love. And when I rocked my grandson to sleep, his tiny hands wrapped around my finger, I believed it. I let that one moment erase everything else. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'd find myself standing at the kitchen sink, staring out the window long after the water stopped running, wondering if I had truly been invited into this home, or if I had simply let myself in. In the beginning, everything felt warm, like stepping into a quilt that still held your scent. Emily would kiss my cheek in the mornings and say, "You don't have to lift a finger, Mom. This is your home now." She'd smile as she placed my favorite mug beside my plate and joked that we were 3 generations under one roof, 4, if we counted the dog. Josh, ever polite, nodded and said, "It's great having you here." His voice was neutral, a little too polished, but I chalked it up to nerves. He and Emily had never lived with another adult before, let alone a parent. I gave them space. I kept my questions brief and my presence soft, like a whisper in their routine. But within the first few weeks, lines began to draw themselves, quiet and invisible, but firm. Emily returned to work earlier than expected. "Just part-time for now," she said, and I agreed it was the right move. She'd worked hard to become a lawyer. I was proud of her. I assured her I'd take care of everything at home. And I did. Each morning I woke before everyone, started the coffee, packed Emily's lunch, and prepped Josh's breakfast plate. By 7 a.m., I had laundry spinning, bottles sterilized, and the baby dressed. Diapers, feedings, tummy time, lullabies. I managed them all while keeping the house spotless. I'd had patients scream in my face and bleed on my shoes. This felt almost peaceful by comparison. At first, Emily texted sweet updates. "Miss you, Mom. Thank you for everything." But then the texts got shorter. Then they stopped. She came home late, exhausted, and barely made eye contact. I thought she was just overwhelmed. Josh was friendly, but distant. He avoided long conversations and started using headphones during dinner. "Work's been rough," he'd mumble, even on weekends. I noticed he never asked how the baby was doing, not directly. When I mentioned milestones, first laugh, a new sound he made, Josh smiled politely, then excused himself. Emily still thanked me occasionally, but it felt mechanical. The hugs faded first. Then came the subtle shifts, her sigh when I reminded her about the baby's nap schedule, the way she took over feedings as if to correct my technique, or the sharp glance when I mentioned a diaper rash she hadn't noticed. One afternoon she said, "Mom, I know you mean well, but I'd prefer if you didn't give him juice without checking with me first." Her tone was flat. I read that too much sugar isn't good for babies. It wasn't juice. It was mashed apple I had pureed myself, something I'd done for her when she was that small. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how she used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, how she used to braid my hair while I graded papers or cooked dinner. And now, she barely let our hands brush when passing the baby. There were small infractions, too. My meal plans were quietly altered. I'd planned salmon and greens, but Emily would order takeout. I'd clean the kitchen, only to find a Post-it that read, "Please don't use the dishwasher after 8 p.m. Baby's sleep gets disturbed." I began feeling like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Worse, decisions started happening without me. Pediatrician appointments were scheduled and I wasn't informed. Emily picked a daycare to look into later, but didn't ask my thoughts. One night, I overheard her telling Josh, "Mom means well, but she's old school. I don't want the baby growing up with outdated parenting methods." I sat in the hallway, heart pounding, fingers clenched into the fabric of my robe. My daughter, whom I had raised alone, who I had worked double shifts for, was now embarrassed by me. Still, I smiled the next morning. Still, I changed the crib sheets, washed the bottles, cooked oatmeal from scratch, because that's what mothers do. We love, even when the air between us grows colder, even when the people we raised forget how much of us they carry in their bones. It started with the mail. One Tuesday afternoon, I noticed a letter on the kitchen counter addressed to me. I hadn't changed my address, so it surprised me. I opened it and found a utility bill, electricity. The account was in my name, the address theirs. I blinked at it, confused. I hadn't signed up for anything. I hadn't even been asked. "Emily," I asked that evening, holding the envelope gently, "why is the power bill in my name?" She glanced at it, then smiled dismissively. "Oh, that. Don't worry, Mom. It was just easier when we set up the new place, when you were helping out with the deposit anyway, remember?" I nodded slowly. I didn't know I was listed as the account holder. She waved her hand like she was brushing away lint. It's a small thing. I'll take care of it later. But she didn't. A week later, I received a bill for water. Then waste collection. All of them bore my name. None of them familiar. I didn't recall signing a single form, yet here they were. Growing numbers on crisp white paper addressed to me. At first, I reasoned it out. They're busy, I told myself. She's a new mother. Josh is working nonstop. I'll handle it for now. I paid the bills and moved on. But then came the Post-its. They appeared on the fridge, on the microwave above the dishwasher. Please don't run appliances after 9 p.m. No kitchen use after 8:30. Baby sleep schedule. Check with Emily before adding spices to baby food. Always written in that neat, round handwriting I taught her in 3rd grade. One evening, after a long day of rocking and bottle warming, I stayed up late to make myself tea. The kettle had just begun to whistle when Emily appeared in the hallway in her robe, eyes half-lidded but voice sharp. "Mom," she said, "could you please not make noise after 9? He just went down. The whole bedtime routine took forever." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine." She cut me off, turning away. "Just remember next time." It wasn't just the kitchen. The hallway lights were kept off now, to save energy. My laundry basket was moved to the garage. Josh added a new password to the Wi-Fi and didn't offer it. When I asked, he mumbled, "I'll text it to you," but never did. And then the doors started locking. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I went to fetch something from the guest bathroom one afternoon and found it locked. Later, the same with the pantry. Eventually, the entire downstairs area, living room, office, guest bath, was locked any time they left the house. One afternoon, I heard the garage door open as they returned from the grocery store. I was holding the baby, walking slowly in the hallway. Josh walked in ahead of Emily, holding bags, and saw me. "Did you go into the living room?" he asked, not unkindly, but with a narrowed tone. "No," I said, "or why?" He looked past me, then shrugged. "Just checking. Some important work stuff's in there." That night, I sat at the edge of my bed. The daybed, no closet, one lamp, feeling like a stranger. The home I'd helped fund, the family I'd poured my soul into, now had boundaries and locks that kept me on the outside. Still, I told myself not to overreact. Maybe they were just trying to create order. New parents had a lot on their minds. I was old enough to know that not every closed door meant rejection. But the next morning, I found my coffee mug missing from the cabinet. In its place, a plastic note. "Use travel mugs only. Ceramic breaks too easily." It wasn't the mug. It was the message. I didn't belong. Not really, not fully. And yet, I kept folding baby clothes, washing bottles, paying bills. Because somewhere, beneath all the locked doors and hushed conversations, I still believed I was helping. I still believed I was wanted. Until I didn't. It had been raining all day, the kind of steady, cold drizzle that soaked through your sleeves and made the air inside feel heavier than it should. By evening, the wind picked up, rattling the loose gutters and sending low howls through the chimney flue. The baby had been restless since lunch. "Teething," Emily said. I had carried him for hours, walking slow circles in the hallway, humming lullabies that once soothed her when she was his size. Around 8:45 p.m., I waited until the house was quiet. Josh had retreated to their bedroom with his laptop, and Emily was upstairs taking a bath. I tiptoed into the kitchen, hoping to warm a small bottle of milk to help the baby sleep through the night. The lights were off, which was normal by now, part of their new sleep hygiene routine. I flipped the switch gently, letting a soft glow wash over the counters. The kettle was still warm from earlier. I reached for the cabinet to grab a bottle, but when I turned to the fridge, I stopped. The door to the kitchen pantry, where we kept the formula, cereal, and most dry goods, was locked. I blinked, confused. I jiggled the knob, quietly at first, then with more insistence. Locked. My stomach tightened. I checked the drawers, then the cabinet under the sink. Empty. No spare box, no backup. Everything had been moved. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. Then I heard the sound of slippers against hardwood behind me. Emily was in the doorway, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping. "Mom," she said, her voice strained. "What are you doing?" "I was going to warm up a little milk," I replied softly. He seemed fussy earlier, and I thought, "It's almost 9, she cut in. "We've talked about this. No kitchen after 9. The baby needs quiet." I hesitated. "I understand, sweetheart, but the pantry is locked. I couldn't find any—" "That's intentional," she said sharply. "We had to start locking things up. Too much stuff gets moved around." I swallowed hard, then took a breath. "Emily, I've been paying the utility bills. For 3 months now, electricity, water, waste, everything. I think we need to talk about it." She blinked at me, stunned, but only for a second. Then her eyes narrowed. "You've been keeping track?" she said, voice rising. "Are you expecting us to reimburse you or something?" "No," I said quickly. "I'm not asking for money back. I just thought, since I've been helping with the bills and the baby and the house, maybe we could clarify things, make it a little more balanced." Emily stepped into the kitchen, crossing her arms. "Clarify what? You're staying here rent-free, Mom. You eat our food. You don't pay for groceries, you don't pay for gas, and now you're tracking utility bills like it's some kind of business transaction?" I felt my cheeks burn. "I've also been taking care of your son, around the clock." She let out a small laugh, cold, humorless. "You wanted to help, you insisted. You moved in and said, 'I'll take care of everything.' And now you're keeping score?" "I'm not keeping score," I whispered, heart pounding. "I just didn't expect to feel like a burden." She scoffed, turning toward the hallway. "Well, maybe you shouldn't act like one." I stood frozen, hands trembling at my sides. Emily glanced back once more, and then came the words that sliced through everything. "You live here for free, Mom. What more do you want?" The kitchen felt colder than the storm outside. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't crack me open right there on the tile floor. She disappeared down the hall, and I stood alone in that glowing kitchen, surrounded by locked cabinets and silence. I reached over and shut the lights off again. In the darkness, I found my way back to the daybed, curled up under the thin blanket and stared at the ceiling. The rain tapped softly against the window. Somewhere down the hall, my grandson cried. No one came to pick him up. The night after Emily's words, I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay still, arms folded across my chest, the blanket tucked tightly under my chin as if it could hold in the pieces of me that felt like they were unraveling. "You live here for free, Mom. What more do you want?" The sentence looped through my mind like a cruel lullaby. I'd heard patients scream. I'd held mothers whose children didn't make it through surgery, but nothing ever sliced through me like that single line. Not because it was harsh, but because it came from her, my daughter. At 60, I thought I had come to understand grief, but this was a new kind. Not the grief of death, but of invisibility, of being erased while still alive. I stared at the ceiling and remembered the night I found out I was pregnant. James and I were young and broke. He wanted to wait, but I said no. I knew that child was meant to come. Emily arrived during a storm, just like tonight. I held her in my arms, and for the first time in my life, I knew what permanence felt like. I gave her everything. My time, my youth, my career. I took night shifts and weekends, skipped vacations, passed up promotions. I made sure her birthday cakes were homemade, that she had new shoes every fall, and that someone was always waiting at the school gate when the bell rang. Now, the same girl who used to cry if I left her side for more than an hour had told me I was a freeloader. The next morning, I moved slower than usual. My joints ached, not just from age, but from the weight of understanding. Something had shifted, something irreversible. Emily didn't come down for breakfast. Josh poured himself coffee and nodded at me, eyes skimming past like I was a piece of furniture he didn't want to trip over. I made toast, but no one touched it. The baby fussed more than usual. Even he felt the change in the air. I started to notice things I'd brushed off before. The way Emily's voice tightened when she spoke to me. How she'd lean away slightly if I stood too close. How she flinched when I reached out to touch her arm. I remembered a week ago when I'd suggested we read to the baby before bedtime. She'd said, "We're doing things a little differently now, Mom." As if the books I read to her were no longer good enough. As if I wasn't good enough. Even Josh, who used to make polite small talk about tech trends and baseball scores, now barely acknowledged me. His words were curt, his footsteps quick when he passed through rooms I occupied. They didn't scream, they didn't throw things. That might have been easier. This was colder. Precise, efficient, practiced, a slow distancing, a quiet erasure. One afternoon, I stood by the living room window, the baby asleep in my arms, and watched Emily and Josh in the backyard, laughing about something I couldn't hear. They looked happy, at ease, like I didn't exist. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just being excluded. I was being transitioned out. It wasn't just the bills, or the post-it notes, or the locked doors. It was the absence of touch, the lack of eye contact, the orchestrated silences. I was no longer part of their present. I was a relic of their past, tolerated but not welcomed. And the worst part, I had made it easy for them. I had handed over my savings, my energy, my time. I had erased my own boundaries, hoping to belong, hoping to matter. But you can't hold on to people who are already letting go. So I stopped asking questions. I stopped offering advice. I kept my voice soft, my steps quieter, my movements contained. I became the background they wanted me to be. But deep inside, something small began to burn. Not anger. Not yet, just awareness. And awareness is where change begins. A week passed, maybe 2. Days blurred together, each one marked by routines that no longer brought comfort. Feed the baby, fold the laundry, cook dinner, clean up, sleep alone. But beneath my silence, a quiet current had begun to stir. I no longer moved through their house with blind trust. I began to pay attention. It started with the mail again. One afternoon, after Emily and Josh had left for a pediatrician's appointment, one I hadn't been told about, I walked past the foyer and noticed a small stack of unopened envelopes tucked under a magazine on the side table. My name was on all of them, not occupant or current resident. Just Mary L. Whitmore in bold type. I picked up the stack and carried it to the kitchen table. Electricity, water, waste management, cable. All accounts listed my full name, not just as the payer, but as the primary account holder. I traced my finger across each envelope, remembering the days when mail with my name on it meant birthday cards, church newsletters, retirement statements. Now it was late fees and payment reminders for a home I didn't own. I pulled out my wallet and opened my banking app. At first, I just wanted to check if any of the utilities had been auto-drafted. But what I saw froze me. A transaction from 2 months prior. Midwest Mortgage Corp., loan processing fee, $395. I didn't remember that. I never signed up for a mortgage. My house had been sold cleanly and I had no debts. My hands hovered over the screen, heart pounding. I clicked through the transaction history. Another one, weeks later. Property insurance adjustment, $221. Something was wrong. That night, while Emily and Josh watched TV upstairs, I sat on the floor of my makeshift bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my suitcase. I had kept every document Emily gave me when I moved in, just in case. The file folder, she said, was routine paperwork from the bank, back when I was helping with the down payment. I laid each page out in rows across the floor. There, near the middle, was a form with my signature, clearly mine, in black ink, but in a block of legal jargon I hadn't read carefully at the time. Emily had said, "It's just a verification page, nothing binding." I had been tired that day, emotional from leaving my house and overwhelmed by boxes and goodbyes. I read it now. Co-signer agreement for FHA-backed home loan. Guarantor responsible in event of default. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't just a helper. I was a legal co-signer. If Emily and Josh stopped paying their mortgage, the debt fell on me. My credit, my name, my financial future. How long had this been in motion? Had this been the plan from the beginning? Was I just a useful name on a dotted line? I remembered that day. She'd poured me a cup of tea, sat beside me at the table, said she was grateful for everything. "You're saving us, Mom," she said. "We'll never forget this." Now I understood what she meant. The room felt colder. I pulled a shawl around my shoulders and sat there, surrounded by paperwork and realization. The betrayal was no longer emotional. It was legal, financial, deliberate. I reached for my phone and took pictures of every page. Then I opened a new email and sent them all to myself, labeling the subject line, "Important, do not delete." The house was silent. Upstairs, the television buzzed with some crime drama. Downstairs, I was living one. I stood, folded the papers slowly, and returned them to the folder. As I slid it back into the drawer, my eyes caught the reflection of myself in the window. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't even look sad anymore. I looked ready. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not from the house. I waited until I walked the baby in his stroller around the block. Something I used to do just for his nap, but now served another purpose. While he dozed beneath a knit blanket, I sat on a park bench beneath a bald oak tree and dialed a number I found online. An elder law firm 2 towns over. Discreet, experienced, independent. The receptionist booked me a consultation for the next day. I didn't tell Emily, I didn't tell Josh. I just said I needed some time to myself, that I'd be going to the library. When I entered the lawyer's office, I felt like an intruder, out of place in my second-hand coat and rain-worn shoes. But Ms. Delgado, the attorney, treated me with quiet respect. She listened as I explained what had happened. The mortgage, the co-signer document, the utility bills, and most importantly, that I'd never been fully informed of the financial consequences. She reviewed the scanned documents I'd emailed. "Legally," she said, adjusting her glasses, "you are liable. You're a co-guarantor on the home loan. That means if they default, even once, the burden falls to you." I swallowed hard. "What if I withdraw? Remove my name?" She paused. "That's complicated. FHA loans are sensitive to guarantor changes. If you remove your name, the bank will reassess their credit risk. Given your daughter and son-in-law's financial profile, the mortgage could be reclassified as higher risk. That might trigger a reevaluation of their interest rate. In worst-case scenarios, they could lose eligibility for their current plan." "In other words," I said quietly, "if I step out, the house might slip from under them." Ms. Delgado nodded, "Or at the very least, they'll face penalties." I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly. It wasn't revenge I felt, not yet, but it was power. A kind of silent, sleeping strength I hadn't known I still carried. When I returned home, Emily was in the living room playing with the baby. She looked up and gave a brief smile. "Library productive?" I nodded. "Learned a few things." That evening after dinner, while Josh took out the trash and Emily gave the baby a bath, I walked upstairs and retrieved a small package I'd kept hidden in my suitcase. Inside was a motion sensor mini camera, something my late husband once used to monitor our front porch after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. I didn't plan to spy, but I needed truth, not just facts. I needed to hear it. I placed the camera discreetly above the hallway cabinet, facing toward the living room. It activated only when it sensed sound or movement, and recorded short clips directly to an encrypted drive. I didn't mention it to anyone. 2 days later, while they were out for groceries, I reviewed the footage. Most clips were ordinary. Baby cries, TV noise, hallway footsteps. Then one file timestamped the previous evening at 8:22 p.m. The living room. Emily's voice hushed but firm. She's not helping us anymore, Josh. She's just here, taking up space, and she keeps acting like we owe her something. Josh replied, "You told her it was temporary." Emily scoffed. "Yeah, and she made herself permanent, but she's not paying the mortgage, not contributing the way she used to. Honestly, she's more of a liability now." Josh was quiet. Then Emily added, almost as an afterthought, "She served her purpose. Now she just sits around paying a few bills and thinking that makes her entitled to anything." My fingers tightened around the mouse. "She doesn't even realize," Emily continued. "We could have gotten this house without her. I just didn't want to wait another year to qualify on our own. But now, she's dead weight." Dead weight. The word sat on my chest like stone. Not just ungrateful, not just dismissive, but calculated. This wasn't emotional immaturity. It was strategy. They had used me knowingly, precisely, and were now discussing how to peel me away like old wallpaper. I closed the laptop, heart thudding, but face still calm. The next morning, I made pancakes, smiled at Josh, kissed my grandson's forehead, acted like nothing had changed, because I had learned what I needed to learn. Now it was my turn to make decisions. The truth had weight now. It wasn't just suspicion or an uneasy feeling in my chest. It was documented, recorded, confirmed through legal papers, whispered conversations, and bank statements. And the more I uncovered, the more everything else came into focus. I had been used, not helped, not invited, not cherished. Used. 3 months ago, I entered this house thinking I was returning to family, that I was stepping into a second act of purpose and love. In reality, I had become a machine, silent, tireless, replaceable. They didn't want a mother. They wanted a free nanny, a part-time maid, and a co-signer with good credit. One afternoon, while the baby slept in his swing and the house was quiet, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and logged into my retirement account. I hadn't checked it in months. There wasn't a reason to. I wasn't drawing from it yet, and I'd always been conservative with my spending. But now I wanted to see. Needed to see. The balance was lower than I remembered. Not alarmingly so. Not enough to scream fraud, but off. Wrong. I clicked into the transaction history. Several automatic transfers stood out. Modest monthly amounts going to a secondary checking account with a familiar routing number. I cross-referenced it with a past bank statement Emily once left on the kitchen counter. It was hers. My daughter had linked her account to mine and was withdrawing monthly sums, $300 here, $400 there, marked as household reimbursement and maintenance support. She hadn't asked. She hadn't mentioned it. She had just helped herself. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But then I remembered the casual way she once said, "It's all family money, Mom. What's mine is yours, right?" I had smiled then. I didn't smile now. She was spending my retirement as if it were her own, and I was letting her. I scrolled further. One line item made me go cold. Credit union car loan, payment via linked account. A loan I didn't recognize, a car I didn't drive. She had used my identity, my account, my trust. I sat back and stared at the screen. The room around me pulsed with silence. A silence that had once meant peace now screamed betrayal. In one corner, the baby's stuffed giraffe lay on the floor. I remembered buying Emily a nearly identical one when she was 5, after a night terror left her inconsolable. Back then, she clung to me as if I were the only safe thing in the world. Now she was bleeding me dry while pretending I was in the way. I stood up, walked slowly to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. Mailboxes, trimmed hedges, kids riding scooters. Everything looked normal. But inside this house, everything had shifted. Not only had I been footing the bills, watching their child full-time, and managing the household alone, I had also been silently holding up their mortgage. Without me, the bank wouldn't have approved the loan. Without my name, they wouldn't qualify. And now, I realized, even my retirement was being drained to cover their convenience. I wasn't just staying here. I was the very reason they had a home at all. and they had the audacity to say I lived here for free. I returned to the table, printed out the transaction reports, and filed them with the rest of my evidence. The folder was getting thick enough to make a case. But that wasn't what I was building. Not a court case. Not yet. What I was building was a boundary, a wall where none had existed. I'd spent my entire life giving without asking, sacrificing quietly. Now I was collecting the pieces of myself they'd scattered, my voice, my name, my autonomy. They wanted a ghost of a mother, someone invisible, silent, endlessly useful. But I was not a ghost. Not anymore. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I didn't even cry. Instead, I made a list. It sat quietly in the back of my journal, tucked between grocery notes and baby nap schedules. Each item was written in neat cursive, like a shopping list for survival. Every check mark was a stitch in a seam I was resewing, not to hold this family together, but to hold myself from falling apart. Step 1. Remove cosigner status. I returned to Ms. Delgado's office and explained what I wanted, calmly, directly. She reviewed the mortgage agreement again and suggested a strategy. You can't just walk away, she warned, but you can give notice. You can initiate formal withdrawal under breach of good faith. We drafted the paperwork. It would take 30 days to process, but the countdown had begun. I signed the notice with a steady hand. Step 2. Separate finances. Back at home, I closed the secondary access on my retirement account. Then I called the bank and revoked Emily's linking permissions to my funds. Quietly, efficiently, I changed passwords, added alerts. I even opened a new account, one with no ties to this zip code. Step 3. Legal boundary. Ms. Delgado helped me draft a cease and desist letter, not aggressive, just formal. It notified Emily that any further use of my identity, financial accounts, or credit profile without written consent would be treated as fraud. The envelope sat in my purse for 3 days before I mailed it. I wanted to wait for the right moment. Step 4. The illusion. I didn't want drama. I didn't want to leave in a storm of accusations. That would be their story to control. I wanted my exit to be quiet but impossible to ignore. So I planned a dinner. I told Emily it was to celebrate 100 days of living together. A little milestone, I said with a smile. 100 days of grandmotherhood. She raised an eyebrow at first, suspicious, but then softened. That's sweet, Mom, she said. Sure, I'll clear our schedule. Josh nodded, barely glancing up from his phone. Sounds good. I cooked for 2 days. I baked the bread Emily used to beg for as a child. I slow roasted her favorite lemon chicken. I made a tiny chocolate cake shaped like a teddy bear, just for the baby. I poured everything into the meal, not for them, but for me. My last act of care, freely given, not extracted. On the morning of the dinner, I cleaned the house from top to bottom. I did one final load of baby laundry. I wiped every corner of the kitchen until the counters gleamed. Then I packed a single suitcase and tucked it under my daybed. Not everything, just enough. The rest could wait. That afternoon, while the baby napped, I wrote 3 notes. One for Emily, sealed and placed beneath her pillow. One for Josh, folded neatly inside the freezer on top of his favorite brand of ice cream. And one for the baby, slipped into a photo album where I'd pasted a picture of him sleeping in my arms. I didn't say goodbye in any of them, just truths, 1 or 2 sentences, enough to sting but never to bleed. That evening, I set the table with linen napkins and real glassware. I lit 2 candles. I wore a blouse James once said made me look brighter than spring. I played soft jazz from the speaker, nothing too emotional. They came down dressed casually like it was just another meal. Emily complimented the table. Josh reached for the bread. We should do this more often, Emily said halfway through the salad. I smiled. Sometimes once is enough. She blinked at me but said nothing. We ate. We laughed. We toasted with sparkling cider. They didn't see it yet, but everything in that room was already past tense. After dessert, I stood and cleared the plates. "Thank you both," I said gently, "for letting me be here these past few months. I've learned a lot." Emily looked puzzled. "Where's this coming from?" I just smiled again and walked into the kitchen. The next morning, before sunrise, I wheeled my suitcase to the porch, left the house key on the table, and stepped outside. The air was crisp. The silence was mine. And for the first time in months, I felt light. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and roasted garlic. I had spent most of the day cooking, letting muscle memory guide my hands while my mind drifted elsewhere. The lemon chicken was in the oven, its skin golden and crisping at the edges. The mashed potatoes had just the right amount of cream. Emily used to like them fluffy, not sticky. I even made green beans sautéed with almonds, a side she always requested on her birthdays, until she went off to college and stopped asking for anything. The cake was cooling on the counter, the frosting setting perfectly. I'd piped 100 days together in white swirls across the top, though the words felt hollow now, like writing in sand just before the tide came in. The table was already set when Emily walked in. "Wow," she said, glancing around. "You went all out." "It felt right," I replied, wiping my hands on a cloth. "Milestones should be marked." Josh followed behind her, holding the baby. "What's the occasion again?" 100 days, Emily answered for me, "since Mom moved in." He nodded, non-committal, and set the baby down in his high chair. We sat, just the four of us, though the room felt more crowded than usual. The silence between clinks of cutlery filled the space like fog. "Did you ever make this when I was a kid?" Emily asked, chewing slowly. "It tastes familiar." I looked at her, smiled. "All the time. Your dad loved it too. Remember the time you tried to pour lemonade on it because you thought it looked dry?" She laughed. A real one. And for a moment, something flickered in her eyes that felt old and familiar. The baby dropped his spoon and giggled. Josh checked his phone. Halfway through the meal, I set down my fork and folded my hands. "You know," I said, keeping my tone soft, "back when I was still working in the ER, we had a patient who came in with a fractured wrist. She said she'd fallen off a ladder while trying to clean her gutters. Classic story. But the brake pattern didn't match. The angle was all wrong. Quietly, she confessed to me that her son had pushed her." Josh looked up. Emily's smile froze. "It happens more than people think," I continued, "but rarely in ways that leave bruises. Some wounds are quiet, invisible. They come from words not said, spaces not shared, truths hidden under polite tones." Emily shifted in her seat. "That's a heavy dinner story, Mom." I looked down at my napkin, then back at her. "Sometimes the truth is heavy." No one spoke. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip of cider. Anyway, we treated her, made sure she had a place to go afterward. But what stuck with me wasn't the injury. It was the look in her eyes, the realization that someone she'd built her life around no longer saw her as a person, but as a burden. The silence that followed was absolute. Josh cleared his throat. "This chicken is really good." I nodded. "I'm glad." Emily tried to smile, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. She reached for the baby's bib and fussed with it more than necessary. After dinner, I brought out the cake. I lit a single candle, more for symbolism than celebration. "To family," I said simply, and blew it out. There were no photos taken, no speeches, just the soft scraping of chairs as we cleared the table. The confrontation hadn't happened yet, not fully, but the room knew. The air was thick with what wasn't being said. They didn't know it was my goodbye, but they would. After dinner, while Emily rinsed the dishes and Josh wiped down the high chair, I excused myself briefly and walked to my room. I returned with a slim manila folder, unlabeled, clean, precise. I placed it on the dining table directly in front of Emily. "What's that?" she asked without looking up. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. something I should have shown you earlier, but tonight felt appropriate. Josh paused mid-wipe. Emily slowly turned, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes dropped to the folder, then back to me. "You're not going to like it," I said calmly, "but I need to say it, and I need you to hear it all the way through." She frowned, confused. "Okay." I opened the folder and slid out the first document, a notarized letter from Ms. Delgado's office. Beneath it, copies of my withdrawal notice from the mortgage. Then the cease and desist letter. Then a printed record of transactions, highlighted, annotated, methodical. "This," I said, tapping the top page, "is confirmation that as of next month, I will no longer be a co-signer on your home loan." Emily froze. "What?" "I've also unlinked my retirement accounts from yours," I continued. "You won't be able to access them anymore. Any further use of my name, credit, or finances without consent will be considered fraud. That's already on record with the bank and my attorney." Her face drained of color. Josh put down the rag slowly. "Wait, what's going on?" "I'm removing myself," I said, my voice steady. "From this arrangement, from this house, from this role you created for me that was never mother, never family, just function." Emily's voice cracked. "Mom, you can't just... This is our home. You're part of this. You helped us get it." I met her eyes. "No, I funded it. I co-signed it. I carried it. But I was never invited in as family. I was used." "That's not true," she snapped. "You said you wanted to help. You moved in." "Yes," I nodded. "I did. Willingly. Lovingly. But what you did afterward wasn't love. It was convenience. It was manipulation. You locked pantries, monitored lights, siphoned money from accounts you didn't ask to touch." She opened her mouth, but I raised my hand gently. "I listened to the recording, Emily," I added. "The one where you told Josh I was no longer valuable, that I was dead weight." Her lips parted in horror. "You recorded us?" "I installed a camera after I started seeing bills I never signed up for," I said quietly. "I needed the truth, and I got it." Josh looked between us, stunned. "You heard that?" "I did." Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're really doing this? You're sabotaging everything we've built?" "I'm not sabotaging anything," I said, standing now. "I'm just stepping away. This was never built together. It was constructed on my back and without my permission." "You're tearing the family apart," she shouted, eyes welling. "Was it ever whole?" I asked. Silence. Then I said, softer but sharper, "From today forward, I'm not the person you can hide behind anymore. You'll have to stand on your own." Emily slumped into a chair, stunned. Josh said nothing. I placed the folder back in front of her. "That's yours to keep," I said. "I've made copies for my records." As I turned to leave the room, Emily said in a low, bitter voice, "You'll regret this, Mom." I stopped in the doorway, glanced over my shoulder. "No," I said, "I've already regretted too much." Then I walked down the hallway past the baby's room, where he slept peacefully, unaware, and into the silence of my own space, where my suitcase waited by the door. The email from the bank arrived exactly 6 days after I left. It was addressed to Emily and Josh, but I had access to a copy through the legal forwarding agreement my lawyer had set up. The subject line was clinical. "Loan status update, guarantor removal acknowledged." But the contents were anything but dry. The message outlined the consequences clearly. With my name officially withdrawn as co-signer, the loan no longer met the preferred risk profile. Their interest rate would increase. The mortgage insurance premium would be re-evaluated. A reassessment of their income-to-debt ratio was pending, and if they missed even one payment under the new terms, foreclosure proceedings could begin within 60 days. The house, which had once felt so cold to me, now felt like it was turning on them. By the end of that week, the silence broke. From what I heard later through a mutual friend at church who ran into Josh at the grocery store, The argument started when the letter from the bank arrived. Josh had opened it first. He'd called out to Emily from the kitchen in disbelief. She'd come down, read the email herself, and then tried to downplay it. "They won't do anything," she said. "It's just scare tactics." Josh disagreed. The yelling began after their son was put to bed. "You used her," he reportedly shouted. "You bled your own mother dry, and now we're paying for it." "I didn't force her," Emily fired back. "She offered. She said she wanted to help." "But you knew what you were doing," he snapped. "The mortgage, the bills, her retirement account? What the hell, Emily?" The argument stretched well into the night. Neighbors later said they heard doors slamming. One even saw Josh sitting on the front porch around 2 a.m., head in hands. The next day, I received a voicemail. Emily's voice was thin and hoarse, like she hadn't slept. "Mom, please call me. I think we need to talk. I didn't realize how serious everything was. I didn't mean for it to get to this point." I didn't return the call. 2 days later, another voicemail came. "Mom, please, I'm sorry, okay? I shouldn't have said the things I did. We need your help. The bank is saying we could lose the house. Josh is furious. He blames me. I don't know what to do." Still, I didn't answer. Then a text message. "Mom, please. If not for me, then for the baby. He misses you. We all do." I read it. I reread it. But I didn't reply. I had already mourned the loss of that family. I had already spent sleepless nights wondering what I could have done differently, how I might have prevented this. But in the end, I realized it wasn't about what I hadn't done. It was about what they had chosen. They had chosen to use me, to silence me, to diminish me. And now they were reaping the consequences of those choices. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was release. Some mornings, I walked the shoreline near my new apartment, letting the ocean wind cut through the remains of my old life. Other days, I sat in the community library, reading novels I'd never had time for while raising Emily. I joined a watercolor class. I cooked only for myself. I paid my own bills. I answered to no one. The phone still rang sometimes. Emily's name would appear on the screen, but I never picked up. Some truths were too loud to unhear. Some wounds too deep to patch with a single sorry. The past may still live in their house. But I had moved on. My new apartment sits 3 blocks from the ocean. It's small, just 1 bedroom, 1 bath, but it's mine. The windows let in a soft, salty breeze each morning, and the sound of seagulls has replaced the sharp clink of dishes I used to wash for a family that no longer acknowledged me. Each day has its rhythm now. I wake early, brew a single cup of coffee, and walk the quiet boardwalk before the tourists arrive. I nod at joggers and greet the elderly man who feeds the pigeons near the pier. I watch the tide rise and fall, letting it mirror the slow, steady return of my peace. Twice a week, I attend a watercolor class at the community center. I hadn't held a paintbrush since high school, but there's something healing in letting color bleed across paper. There's no pressure to be good, just present. It was there, in that bright sunlit room, that I met Clara. She sat beside me on a rainy Tuesday morning, struggling to mix the right shade of lavender. We both laughed when our paintings looked more like bruised skies than blooming fields. She was in her late 60s, widowed 5 years, with no children. We bonded quickly, over bad art, over good coffee, over the quiet ache of being underestimated. Clara has become the kind of friend I didn't know I still had space for. We take turns hosting small dinners, swapping recipes, and reading aloud from mystery novels we pretend not to take seriously. She listens without judgment, and when she shares pieces of her own story, it feels like trust, not trauma. "I thought I was too old to start over," she told me once. "Turns out I was just too tired to believe I could." I understood. One afternoon, after a long walk, we sat on the beach and watched the waves claw at the sand. I told her about Emily. Not all the details, not the ugliest parts, but enough. She didn't gasp or pity me. She just placed a warm hand on mine and said, "You chose yourself. That's rare and brave." That night, I began drafting a new will. My lawyer was surprised when I called again. "Back so soon?" She joked gently. "I'd like to make a few changes," I said. The revised document was simple. I left everything I owned, what little remained of my savings, the condo proceeds from my old house, the small pension, the boxes of photo albums, to my grandson, but with one condition. It would not be managed by Emily, not ever. Instead, I named a legal trustee, someone impartial, independent. I also attached a letter to be read when he turned 18, a letter explaining who I was, who I had tried to be, and why I had made the decisions I did. He may never read it. He may grow up without remembering my face, my hands, my voice, but if he does, I want him to know I loved him. I just couldn't stay in a place where love had become currency. I signed the will and tucked a copy into my desk drawer. I didn't cry. These days, I don't cry as much. There are still moments when I pass a mother and daughter laughing in a cafe, or when I see a child clutching their grandmother's hand at the crosswalk, that something twists in my chest. But it's not pain anymore. It's memory. It's proof that I was real, that I gave what I had, and now I am giving to myself. The woman I used to be, the caregiver, the fixer, the silent backbone. She still lives inside me, but she no longer runs the show. Now I lead with quiet boundaries and firm yeses to joy. Every Friday, Claire and I go to a tiny bookstore that smells like lemon oil and old pages. We sip tea, browse the aisles, and sometimes leave without buying anything. It's enough just to linger. Freedom, I've found, isn't loud. It's gentle. It's walking into a home with your own name on the lease. It's buying flowers because you want to, not because someone expects a centerpiece. It's knowing that you can love someone and still leave them. And it's the certainty that this time, the story belongs to you. The letter took me 3 days to write. I started it with trembling hands, unsure of the words, not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because I knew this would be the last thing I ever gave her that came from my heart. No edits, no filters, just the truth, printed in ink across soft linen paper, sealed in a plain white envelope. I didn't write to convince her. I didn't write to hurt her. I wrote because some goodbyes are too sacred to leave unsaid. Dear Emily, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Not just from your house, but from the version of motherhood you tried to reduce me to. I don't hate you. I don't even feel anger anymore. What I feel is something quieter, like the stillness after a storm when you realize the house is still standing, but the roof is gone. You told me I was living in your home for free, that I was taking up space. But you forgot something. You forgot who carried you through every fever, every heartbreak, every broken dream you were too young to understand. You forgot who gave up promotions to attend your piano recitals, who skipped meals so you could have braces, who stayed up sewing your Halloween costumes even when her hands ached from 12-hour shifts. When you saw me as a burden, you erased everything I had done to make your life possible. But I remember. And that memory is mine to keep, even if you choose to forget. There's a difference between helping someone and being used by them. I didn't learn that until I was 60, but I know it now. And I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. When you become a mother, truly, deeply, you'll understand that loving your child doesn't mean surrendering your soul. If your son ever looks at you the way you looked at me, I hope you'll pause. I hope you'll remember this letter, because motherhood is not a transaction, it is a legacy. And mine ends here. Mom, I didn't mail the letter. I left it in the family photo album tucked behind the picture of us on her 6th birthday. Emily in a yellow dress, frosting on her chin, me behind her, arms wrapped tight around her waist. A moment frozen in innocence before the shift, before the gap, before silence. That morning, after placing the letter in the album, I walked to the beach. The sun had just begun to rise, casting gold across the water in soft ribbons. The tide whispered in and out, gentle as breath. In one hand, I held a canvas. It was a painting from class, a watercolor I'd made of that same birthday photo, reimagined in warm strokes of orange and blue. The details were soft, but the feeling was there. Joy, closeness, the kind of safety only a mother can give. I stood at the shoreline and watched the waves. A child ran past, laughing, and for a moment I closed my eyes and let the sound fill me, not with grief, but with gratitude. I had loved fiercely. I had given everything, and now I had chosen to keep what little remained, for me. The sand shifted beneath my feet, cool and wet. I smiled, not the kind of smile meant for photos, the kind that says, I survived, the kind that says, I am enough. As the wind picked up, I pressed the painting gently to my chest, letting the sea mist kiss its edges. And then I turned, barefoot and steady, walking back toward the path that led home.